This is the Kaiten manned torpedo. Its name means turning the heaven or turn of the heaven's will. The Kaiten was designed for Japanese special attack units, as its constructors hoped it could change the tide of the war in the Pacific theater. 6 types of Kaiten would be produced. However, in this film, we'll focus on the operational Type 1. Built around a Type 93 Model 3 torpedo, the Kaiten Type 1 was essentially a stretched and modified torpedo, with room for a pilot and his control compartment. The total length of the Kaiten was 48 feet, with a maximum hull diameter of 3.3 feet and a displacement tonnage of around 8.3 tons. The hull was built from 2 parts. The forward section was a cylinder that was 3.3 feet in diameter with a round bow. The rear section was essentially most of the propulsion unit from a Type 93 Model 3 torpedo. The rear section was inserted into the forward cylinder to complete the hull. A steel fairing was placed between the 2 sections, making a smooth transition from the wider front section to the narrow aft. This hull enabled a maximum depth of around 262 feet, but at depths of 164 feet and below, water leaks became visible, and in a short time, the Kaiten could be flooded and sink. In the center of the Kaiten was a small tower for holding the periscope and shielding the deck hatch from waves. Another entrance hatch was in the keel, slightly ahead of the pilot's seat. With this larger hatch, the pilot could enter the Kaiten from a larger submarine, while both submarines were still underwater. Behind an explosive-filled warhead in the bow, the Kaiten had a forward oxygen tank that was 27.4 cubic feet in volume. None of the oxygen went to the pilot. It was all for the engine. Over this tank was placed 8 compressed air bottles that were mainly used to power the Kaiten's steering. Below and to the sides of the oxygen tank were 2 forward trim tanks, 2.8 cubic feet in volume. The forward kerosene tank sat at the end of the oxygen tank and held just under 26 gallons. In the middle of the hull was the pilot's compartment, where the pilot, periscope, electrical gyroscope, and various gauges, controls, and valves were placed. Inside the rear section, behind the pilot's compartment, was an aft oxygen and fuel tank, identical to the ones in the front section. It too featured a pair of trim tanks. Further towards the aft was a gas generator chamber, a 2-stroke piston engine, screw shafts, and 2 counter-rotating screws. The propellers were a standard 4-blade design from a Type 93 torpedo. There were 4 rigid fins at the aft in a cross-plane configuration. The 2 horizontal planes each had a hydroplane. When the hydroplane went up and the submarine was in a forward motion, the submersible would pitch up. Conversely, when they pointed down, the submarine would pitch down. The vertical fins each had 2 rudders attached to control the course. On each vertical fin, one of the rudders was for manual control, and another was used by the gyroscope-controlled autopilot. As the Type 93 torpedo had no provisions for manual rudder controls, steering rods for the manual rudders were arranged by passing through supporting brackets on the outside of the submarine. The warhead in the bow carried 3,420 pounds of explosive. This was made up of 60% TNT and 40% hexanitrodiphenylamine. It had an explosive charge 3 times the size of the Type 93 torpedo's original warhead. The detonator was placed in the middle of the warhead and was activated through inertia by impacting with a target. If the charge did not detonate, there were 2 electrical fuses in the back of the explosive charge that could be primed by the pilot manually upon release of a safety mechanism. The Kaiten had a two-cylinder, double-acting horizontal reciprocating engine, similar in design to most of the torpedo engines at the time. It had one big difference. Instead of using compressed air as the oxidizer, the Type 93 torpedo and Kaiten used pure oxygen. This greatly increased the power produced and extended the range of the vessel. Another advantage